Welcome to The Pictures Get Smaller. My name is Adam O'Conaghy and I'm the producer of this show. The things you'll hear over the next hour or so represent the views of The Pictures Get Smaller and the people making them. All opinions and quotations in no way represent River West Radio and are the sole responsibility of the producer, guests, and callers. River West Radio is not liable for any legal issues arising from the content of this program. So good evening, and welcome to episode 16 of The Pictures Get Smaller. I'm Adam O'Conaghy, and for our first episode of 2013, I'm joined by fellow grad students Shelley Dierda and Susan Kearns, who also is the education director for Milwaukee Film and a filmmaker in her own right. With these two experts on hand, tonight we'll be discussing women filmmakers, a topic that admittedly is much too complex for just 1 hour. Regardless, we're going to attempt to cover several contemporary directors, as well as the critical reactions these women have prompted, and the ongoing challenges for female directors in an industry that still provides far fewer opportunities than those extended to male counterparts. To begin, we decided to consider the career of Kathryn Bigelow. Bigelow has directed one of the most discussed movies of the season, Zero Dark 30. So now that we're getting started, Shelley, Susan, Bigelow's career is rather unique in several ways. Just what is it that makes Bigelow is such a unique figure, both in the film industry and in terms of our topic for tonight as a woman filmmaker?
All right. Well, I can start to say that as when I think of Bigelow, I think of, she usually doesn't, direct movies that are, more like geared toward women. Because I just think of, like the Hurt Locker or Point Break, I believe it's called. Yes, yeah. It's usually like kind of more in the new one, Zero Dark 30. It's just that it's usually I'm used to female filmmakers that usually use female protagonists, and they're usually dramas, and but Bigelow has like a penchant for war and more action type of films.
Right. Yeah. Just to name a few other highlights, I guess, of her career. Near Dark from the 80s is this sort of vampire movie with Bill Paxton. Point Break from 91 has Patrick Swayze and Keanu Reeves in this weird homosocial bonding film against surfers and bank robbers.
Yeah, a lot of president's masks.
Exactly.
Yeah. Strange Days is a sort of interesting sci-fi sort of precursor to something like The Matrix, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
K-19, The Widowmaker, a Harrison Ford submarine movie, Hurt Locker, Iraq war film, and now Zero Dark 30 about the raid on Bin Laden's compound by SEALs. So yeah, this is a weird sort of subject matter, right, for a director.
Right.
Or maybe it's not, but it seems like it's always commented upon that because she is a female director, it's peculiar for many people that she directs these types of films. I mean, as a filmmaker, yes, that subject matter is perhaps distinct, but what, from your experience with watching Bigelow's films, like, what qualities does she have? Like, how does she bring a distinct touch to the action that she presents? Like, what is it? Does she have, like, directorial signatures aside from just the subject matter? I mean, there's a certain freneticism that I can recall from all her films, right? There's really lovely images in the middle of, like, the action, like in Point Break, when they're skydiving.
True, very true.
There's some nice compositions and very, like, interesting framings. The Hurt Locker is really... I mean, it's not necessarily her doing the editing, but that affects the tone of the film, I guess. But yeah, I'm sorry. I don't mean to steer this in other directions.
No, not at all. I think one of the things that I find interesting about her, and part of the reason I'm stumbling is because it's been a couple of years since I've seen any of her films.
Sure.
So I'm my memory is shot, and the power of recall is not there. But I think about something like Point Break, and I saw that when it first came out, and I loved it, right? And what I find striking about Bigelow is that, and maybe it was just because I was too young to pay attention to these kinds of discussions, but I saw Near Dark and I saw Point Break, and it was never about being a woman filmmaker.
Sure.
It was like Near Dark sort of had this, cult following immediately, right? And then And then Point Break, everybody just loved it. So it's sort of this, huge mainstream hit. So I think it's interesting that now, now that she's going more, even Strange Days, I remember it sort of bombed.
Yeah.
And then there was, again, kind of immediately a backlash. People thought it was maybe smarter than it was being given credit for. But but it seems like now people are starting to really define her as
Right.
a woman, and like, and
Right.
maybe it's because of, I don't know if it's because she's gaining more sort of accolades or something, or if it's specifically because she went more military, or
Yeah.
you know, or
Or perhaps just that she endured and now has this body of work that can be assessed
yeah,
as a whole.
yeah, absolutely. So I find that kind of fascinating about her, that it was, you know, her movies kind of came first, and then her,
Yeah.
now it seems like everybody's talking about her as a
Right.
woman.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know if I don't know if it has anything to do with her Oscar win or what, but I know that, you know, the term the Bigelow effect was kind of used, but it's kind of fizzled since last year there were no
And that Bigelow
nominated.
effect being that more women would be able to make
Right.
mainstream Hollywood
Right.
films.
It would be nominated for Best Director, and it sort of bombed out because there was not one nomination last year. So hopefully, you know, we'll find out tomorrow if a female.
Yeah.
So maybe she'll make it again. I don't know, into the category, but it would be great to have someone back in that category. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, with Bigelow being, I mean, The Hurt Locker, I suppose, is technically an indie film,
Right.
right? Like production-wise, but and distribution-wise, but it still gained mainstream notoriety, I guess.
Right.
And so we still don't see a lot of sort of mainstream films being directed by women, right? I mean, that's
Right.
like
Right.
the thing that we aren't getting like a
Right.
from Bigelow's success.
Right.
Before moving on to a couple other, I guess mainly American female directors who have broken through to the mainstream, you brought up like Catherine Hardwicke and maybe even Amy Heckerling or
Yes.
someone. I did want to linger over Zero Dark 30 and the build up to that, where we get a random sort of snarky tweet from Bret Easton Ellis, the sort of notorious provocateur
Yeah.
Right.
and privileged white male author,
Right.
calling her overrated.
Yeah, he did that
in
when
the-
she won actually for the Oscar. He said that she would have won.
But she won that Oscar several years ago, and he just recently like made this
Yep.
proclamation,
Right, about how
Prior
she's
to her-
overrated because she's hot.
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, this seems like the most maybe overt, explicit example of maybe the misogyny and
Right.
that women still face in this industry. But would he have been compelled to say something similar? I mean, I suppose not, right? If it was like if some random male director made The Hurt Locker and this other like militaristic film.
Right.
I mean, is there something else to it? Does some people have critiqued Bigelow for almost being apolitical? Like she's showing, you know, two war films essentially that are really sort of touchy subjects, so they could be, and she just presents it seemingly without commentary, right? And
Right.
I haven't seen Zero Dark 30, none of us have, but
No.
it depicts torture, and that's been one of the things that's gained a lot of public discourse.
Well, and I think it depicts torture as leading to the information that leads to the capture of Bin Laden, and that's, you know, the cause and effect nature of that is part of what she's being taken to task for, because it's, you know, it's sort of providing an upside to torture.
Yeah.
So I think that's, yeah, I read an article by Alex Gibney, actually, the documentarian, and he was just, you know, really sort of engaging with this idea of like, what does it mean to take that side in your film, and
Yeah.
as sort of aside from whether or not she's a woman, you know, he said it's a great film, it's, you know, it's really well crafted, it's also really troubling, and here's why.
Yeah, I suppose maybe there's an assumption that female filmmakers might be coming from a more liberal perspective, perhaps,
Right.
and that's maybe what's throwing people off, that she's working in genres, action films that maybe tend to be conservative
Yeah.
or have like reinforced conservative values, and so she's belying like the stereotype about female filmmakers in multiple ways, not just subject matter, but ideologically, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting, you know, and maybe it's also a Hollywood thing. I mean, I think a lot of people
Sure.
expect, like, you know, militaristic films coming out of Hollywood to be more liberal
Right.
in general. But again, I haven't seen it, so it's hard.
Yeah.
You know.
Yes, this is all speculation.
Definitely.
Responding to what other people have said.
Yes.
So maybe we can move on to some people whose work we have seen. You know, speaking of Bret Easton Ellis, one of his most notorious novels, American Psycho, considered unadaptable, was made. The screenplay was co-written by Mary Herron and Guinevere Turner. And the film was directed by Mary Herron. I think it was widely successful, far better than the novel itself. Any comments on Mary Herron as a filmmaker? the opportunity she has had or hasn't had since then. It seems like every few years she has a little something comes out, but doesn't get much
Right.
distribution aside from American Psycho, from what I can recall.
Yeah.
Right. I believe she's had some experience in cable television because I believe she directed a couple of 6 Feet Under episodes as well.
Yeah.
Which to me seems pretty fitting because it's kind of her style. Because when I think of American Psycho, for example, I find a lot of comparisons to the Dexter series on Showtime, for
Of course,
example. So I mean, and some of these shows are like darker, and so it would make, to me, it made perfect sense that she was asked to direct a couple of those episodes, which was a pretty successful show in its running. So
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, she also directed. Most recently, she did the Moth Diaries.
Yeah.
Right.
That I saw last year, and it wasn't a film that I really loved, and it really didn't do anything. I don't even know if
Yeah.
it got a theatrical release, to be honest. I just pulled my phone out because I was going to see what I wrote when I saw it. I think I compared it to like a Kmart Suspiria or something.
Wow.
It really wasn't very good. But I love I Shot Andy Warhol, which was
Her
one
first-
of her films.
yes.
And I just find it to be really sort of incredibly underrated. And one of the things I like about it is has the same, not exactly the same kind of humor
Mm-hmm.
as American Psycho, but she has a real investment in very dark humor.
Yeah.
And I don't think people watch I Shot Andy Warhol and see it as a funny film.
Mm-hmm.
And I just find it intensely like kind of hilarious. And I think people want to take it very serious because it's like, oh, this, here's this extreme feminist and this and that. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, but it's also really funny, so.
Right. Well, that's what I found was so brilliant about American Psycho is that, being feminist, I thought it was a brilliant attack on male behavior, the way that
Sure.
she, crafted the film. So, yeah. So it's just, I don't know, I guess it was disappointing when her latest film didn't do so well, but yeah, she strikes me totally as someone who's feminist, for sure. So,
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I think that was like one of the things that was maybe lobbed against the novel American Psycho was that it was valorizing these fantasies of violence and degradation against women, against the lower class,
Right.
that the protagonist engages in.
right.
And she brings this real subversive element to it, showing how ridiculous those impulses are, right? That
right.
it's not just male privilege, but capitalism itself is under attack in this film.
Yeah, I think she did a very good job of exaggerating that period of 1980s greed in there. Yeah, so I mean,
Yeah.
it was just brilliant. It was just a brilliant way of kind of capturing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, one thing to say about Bret Easton Ellis too is that he loves attention. Clearly,
course,
he loves
yes.
attention, and so in some ways, it's hard to even put any stock in what he said. It's like, does he really mean anything he says?
Yeah.
Or is he
Right.
just like you said, a provocateur?
Mhm.
Like what can I throw out into the Twitterverse?
Yeah, Twitterverse.
Yeah.
that, that's going to get me a lot of attention right now.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, under normal circumstances, I wouldn't pay much mind to anything that Bret Easton Ellis really says. But in light of our conversation, of course,
Yeah,
I had to bring it
definitely.
up.
Yeah.
Well, okay, maybe we can look then. Susan, you'd mentioned Catherine Hardwicke. Or wait, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have someone whose career, I guess, kind of began alongside like Catherine Bigelow, Amy Heckerling, and
Yeah.
she worked in the mainstream in like high school comedies and really like smart, brings a smartness to those genres that we don't otherwise see lots of times, like real, I don't know, a level of complexity maybe to some of the characterizations in like Fast Times at Ridgemont High and the things that they experience. So I don't know. Yeah, Hardwicke or Heckerling, any comments?
Well-
Heckerling unfortunately seems to have faded away a little
she did
bit.
Vamps.
Yeah.
Vamps last year is about the
Right.
female vampires. That
Right.
it also didn't get a theatrical release, but I think it's on VOD now.
Yeah.
Is Alicia Silverstone's in that again, isn't she?
Oh, really?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But again,
Take
I
you back to the
haven't seen
Clueless days.
it. Right.
Yeah.
Which was 1995.
Right.
It was just a while ago. So
The movie's so good.
it is. I just watched it again recently. So.
But
Yeah.
since Clueless, Heckerling hasn't done much in the mainstream, from what I recall.
I
I
don't
I thought I was
believe
looking ahead of
so.
time, and I did not see much.
Yeah, I don't think I did either. Yeah.
I mean, it seems like, again, the opportunities ebb and flow for some of these filmmakers, right? Like even Catherine Hardwicke, who directed Twilight,
Right, Twilight.
which was really successful, was dropped from the sequels. Like she wasn't.
Right.
Yeah.
And there was some controversy around that, if I
Right.
recall. Do all of you know any of the details or any? Do you have any thoughts on?
I was still stuck on Heckerling. All right, hang on. Hardwick.
But anyway, like,
Sure.
well, speaking of Hardwick, I think one of her best films was 13.
Yeah.
I mean, that she actually did a press junket for that because when back in my press days, I was able to meet her, and this was way before she did Twilight, and yeah, I just thought, I think that's one of her best films actually.
Sure.
Yeah.
Better than Twilight.
Well, of course.
Yeah, I mean that's my opinion though.
I mean, for listeners who haven't possibly seen 13, it's about these two 13-year-old girls, right? And
Right, basically just teenagers who find trouble.
yeah,
I mean,
and
but-
go downhill fast.
yeah, it go downhill really fast, and you
Yeah.
feel for the poor mother who played by Holly Hunter.
Yeah.
Trying to control your child when they're
Yeah.
pretty much spinning out of control, and this is like the crucial period of adolescence, and I think she did a great job capturing that. But at the same time, I thought it was great because I actually did show it to friends who have kids that are of that age, or I made sure they saw it just so they are it's kind of an awareness piece of what could possibly happen, what your child could be doing
Yeah,
if you're
it's
not
like a
paying
cautionary
attention.
tale.
Exactly. So I mean, I just thought it was brilliantly crafted and told.
Well, and it
seemed to be
was-
like a companion to kids or something.
Yeah,
maybe,
right.
But 10-ish years later, 8 years
Right,
later.
and it was
Yeah.
a huge splash at Sundance. It was like
Right.
everybody was talking about it right away, and she did Lords of Dogtown afterwards, which is also kind of an interesting, because a skater film, which I guess you might not expect, but from Twilight, yeah, one of the things I find interesting about her is that with Twilight, she becomes, a filmmaker who's making these huge budget,
Yeah.
huge grossing films. And the last film she did was Little Red Riding Hood, which was just universally panned. I
Yeah.
mean, people just hated that movie. And I honestly don't know what she's up to now, but it looked like she's maybe moving into television. And you had mentioned that Mary Harron, you thought, moved into television as well.
Right.
And that actually seems like a pretty standard kind of trajectory. It's like women make a couple of films and then end up either moving into television or ending up sort of balancing between the two. Maybe more so than male directors. And maybe that's
Right.
maybe that's too broad of a generalization, but it definitely seems like it.
It could be this trend.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I don't know for sure, but I've heard it rumored that that's the way that you should go. I heard there's more money and more opportunity, but I mean, that's probably overgeneralizing as well, but that's what I've heard rumored.
Yeah. I mean,
So-
there are opportunities for work, but they aren't necessarily the personal projects that they're getting with the films that they would have made.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Amy Heckerling, I find it to be really, really interesting. 'Cause,
Yeah.
I still think that Fast Times at Ridgemont High is like one of the best teen films ever. And when she was making that, I mean, one of the things that she did that I think is just brilliant was she sent Cameron Crowe back to high school.
Oh yeah.
So when he's writing this, he's actually in high school, like.
Right.
But she also she really faced the censors for that because they wanted to rate it X, and so like I find this kind of fascinating too. One of the things she had to cut is, do you guys remember the Damone character? The sort of sleazy guy who sells concert
Oh,
tickets
okay.
and wears the
Yeah.
piano scarf.
Okay.
In the movie, he has sex with Jennifer Jason Leigh and like gets her pregnant right away. In the first cut, he couldn't get it up, and so it was like this very disappointing
Yeah.
scene, and it was a lot about sort of like, being a conflicted male teenager as
Sure.
well, and the censors wouldn't stand for it, which I find,
Right.
it's okay to see Jennifer Jason Leigh's boobs, and they had to wait to shoot those
Right.
scenes until she turned 18 and all of that, or maybe that was Phoebe Cates, I can't remember,
Yeah.
but anyway.
Right.
But on the other side, like they can't even address the notion
Yeah.
that a man could be or a boy could be feeling some,
Yeah. So instead
nervousness.
of the usual just pure raunchiness, there's a frank approach to sexuality and the complexity of that, right?
yeah, definitely.
Of the development of teens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and she brings maybe a similar approach to like Clueless, which is that a reimagining of Emma, is that right? I can't remember now.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
you're
And-
right. Mhm.
Yes.
So in updating this literary classic in a high school genre with, again, not necessarily explicit, but more frank, like characters more frankly discussing like real life concerns than you
Yeah.
might get in other films.
And just ridiculously funny.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right.
And she gets other mainstream work. I think she directed the sequel to the first Vacation, European Vacation.
Oh
movie.
yeah,
Oh,
she did Look
yes.
Who's
Yeah.
Talking.
Yeah.
Or
Yes.
one or
So
two of
she's
those.
getting like steady
yeah.
work in
I think
Hollywood,
at
which
least two. Yeah.
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 I just find it curious. Like, I don't know if it's by choice or not, but like why there's been this gap in mainstream opportunities, it seems, for someone like Kerkeling after, well, over a decade of real mainstream success.
Right.
Right.
Well, we've been talking about these mainstream directors for a while, and you briefly mentioned the festival circuit, and it's a topic that I know is near and dear to both of you. You both are very involved with film festivals, and
Yes.
so maybe we can talk about some of the issues of distribution, of the work of women directors, and how that relates to the festival circuit. In your experience, I know, Shelley, you've read some articles about this and done some research on that. So what sorts of things have you two found?
Well, lately, I don't know. Well, recently, that just came out was the Sundance news that this is probably a record for the number of women filmmakers that will be part of the lineup this year. And this is coming right after the Cannes Film Festival,
Yeah.
where there were really not. I don't think there was one really, if not like very, very few, which caused a big controversy. So I know that there was petitions circulated for that and everything, because I know I signed a few of them.
Yeah.
I did too.
Yeah, I'm an activist in this way. So, it angered a lot of women. And so I know we were talking a bit ago before we started the show about this, and we were just wondering if this is like purely coincidental, or it's like, a message to the Cannes Film
Yeah.
Festival, or maybe this is
That Sundance was responding to that controversy
Right.
by being more inclusive.
right. But then, it could be the case that there's just a lot of, films that are happening right now that
Yeah.
are
That are
great.
good, yeah.
that are good, and you can see the talent of these women. So I mean, I'm not really sure. I haven't looked through the whole list, but some of them obviously aren't out for us to see. But I mean, it just makes you wonder about this.
Yeah.
With the article that you were reading, was there an information? So Sundance said the most women filmmakers they've ever had, but was there any information about still the percentage of overall of all the films that were made by women? Was
Well,
it?
I think in the fiction competition it's 50-50.
Is it? Okay.
And I think that's why they were really talking about it.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting because then I saw some reactions to it, because it's great that it was getting so much publicity and people are like, "Oh, this is awesome."
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, what I think we're really striving for is a moment when it's 50-50 and it's not unusual enough
Yes.
to like make
It should be
major
unremarkable.
headlines. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But in terms of competition, I think that's what it was. So
Right.
Yeah.
I believe so.
Yeah. I mean, when when you bring up that issue, I mean, even just having the topic for this radio show, I felt a bit sheepish about it. Right? It's women filmmakers. It's such a unwieldy category because
Right.
there's so many different, economic distinctions, national cinema distinctions, all sorts of things, and so. I was sort of relying on both of you to say where we should start. So I guess we're starting,
and then we didn't.
at the most, widely seen perhaps filmmakers, and then gradually getting a little more obscure, I suppose. Anyway, so yeah, other other comments about film festivals in relation to this topic. Was anything else stand out aside from these recent stats that were coming through from Cannes and from Sundance?
I read something recently, and I can't remember where I read it, and I think I maybe forwarded it to you, but it was just remarking on the number of really incredible documentaries by women this year that were
Yeah.
making the festival circuit. And Ai Weiwei was one of them that they commented on, and Detropia, and I think The Queen of
Yeah.
Versailles, all these really, really solid documentaries that, because everybody we've primarily been talking about is, fiction
Right.
filmmakers. And so I think that's an area that potentially could be, it's clearly a different kind of filmmaking system, so there might be more, an easier route for women to sort of enter that and maintain a steady flow of personal projects without
Yeah.
having to, make the choice to go to television or
Right.
that with narrative film requires more upfront financing perhaps
Oh, for
than
sure,
documentary
yeah. Oh,
films where
yes.
you can get away with, really light equipment, right? Like essentially handheld cameras if you
Right.
really want to do
Yeah,
it.
no, that's
Yeah.
very true because I know, well, I think I read, I don't know if it was some that you sent or forwarded, but I think that that's always been a strong category for women, and I think mainly because of the financial
Yeah.
issues that surround it. But I know that recently, because I'm into documentarian Natalia Almada, who's a Mexican filmmaker, and I know that it was very cheap for her to make because digital video and the handheld and everything, they have more access to this, and it doesn't require a larger crew, and I believe that does have a lot to play with it because the whole controversy of women filmmakers is what I know from my last degree, because I studied this pretty intensely, is that a lot of companies won't back them because they're unsure of what they could do in the work that they've made when they haven't made a fiction
There's an
film before.
industry-wide
Right.
skepticism
Yes.
towards.
I believe so. Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
And I wish I could report something differently, but but that's I think that handheld and the video and the digital. I know I read that in an interview with Almada,
Yeah.
who actually said that too. So
Yeah.
it's more she had more access to she could do what she wanted
And what sorts of subject matter does Almada work on? Like, can you just speak to some of her films that you've seen? And-
Yes, absolutely. The one recently was done on PBS, the POV
Yeah.
series called El Velador, which is the Night Watchman, and it's about a little over an hour documentary, and it basically it's very lyrical and metaphorical. Like there's no dialogue, very little. Which is usually her style of filmmaking, but it basically kind of portrays the war, the drug cartels between Mexican American, between the border and the violence, and not only that, but all kinds of violence,
Yeah.
and how this has become a really big problem for Mexican society because the cemeteries are running out of space, and I think that her topics are usually political as well. So, and I know she's done well at Sundance before, and she's one of these women who had no intention of being a filmmaker, but now has a talent for it because I think she was more into photography. But if you do see her films, you can see she does a lot of long takes
Yeah.
and that are quite lengthy. And I know that her work is being noticed because she was just granted $500,000 from the MacArthur Foundation
Yeah.
for
Right.
her work, and with a promise to do more. This foundation like that wants to see more from someone like her.
Yeah.
So at least there's talent there.
Well, and you bring up an interesting point too, because you were saying that she didn't set out to be a filmmaker. It was like she saw something and she was like, okay, well, I need to do this. And
Yeah.
that's actually an impulse that I've been seeing, fairly frequently in the last few years too. Like watching films for the film festival, I'll do some research on the directors, and it's like one of them was a documentary on education, and the woman essentially, and I can't remember her name, but anyway, she basically said, I've been watching my children go through the educational system and I had to do something, so I made a film. So it would be kind of interesting to see if that, to track that as if that's a common response or a
Yeah.
common reason.
I believe so, because I can think of a few women filmmakers offhand, whether they're documentarians or if they do fictional film, but all the ones that I have seen interviews with or read interviews, I'll
Yeah.
say that this stems from a personal experience of me and I feel the need to tell it. I can think of three
Right.
offhand. So
that's interesting.
yeah, and you said the woman who made the educational video. I'm not really sure of the film festival where I'm currently with. I don't know if there may be one that was done about a child with a disability, I believe, because I think the director is a mother of a child
Yeah.
with a disability.
Right.
But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's what I'm finding so far as a trend.
Yeah. Even at the Milwaukee Film Festival, I saw Cairo, the number escapes me,
Right.
a fictional version of the sexual harassment experienced by women in Egypt. So again, it's this real life experience informing, or really not just informing, but producing the films, being the impetus for these films being made,
Right.
calling attention to other areas of misogyny and harassment and all sorts of
Correct.
gender-related problems. Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
Since we're sort of on the topic of it, should we stick with some of these Latin American filmmakers? briefly, since I know that's sort of your research area, Shelley. and
Yes, it
you
is.
probably won't be able to join us again for a couple months.
Yes.
Um,
I'm sorry.
no. That's why it's good that you're here tonight.
Yes.
So, I mean, two names off the top of my head that I've seen a little bit by, and Claudio Llosa, who's known, I think, for Mare and USA
Yep.
and for The Milk of Sorrow,
Correct.
and Lucretia Martel, who I just caught up on a little bit and saw The Holy Girl and Headless Woman, and I was kicking myself, like, why I'd never seen these amazing films before.
Yes, they are amazing. So you need to see The Swamp too, then.
Yeah. That's her debut, right? She
Yes.
has like 3, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So I thought that you did some research on them, or you studied them some. So I mean, what's your take on them as filmmakers? Do they have certain thematic concerns, certain formal elements? I mean, with Martel, like just her framing, I thought was really remarkable, and
Right.
I mean, reminded me of someone like Antonioni almost in a weird sort of way, like
Right.
this like still frame with tight compositions. that I
Right,
really
exactly.
Was impressed by. But,
Yeah, because I think she does really, I mean, that's a good point, because I think she really does have this talent for capturing that suffocating, like, claustrophobia. Like, she wanted that feeling, and I think it does come across.
yeah,
I mean, it's something you happen to notice right away.
yeah.
But she's actually, I would add her, so maybe there's 4 offhand that I can think of, that I know both Llosa and Martel do both of their films from personal experience as well.
Yeah.
They feel this, they have this penchant, to tell, their experience of their homelands.
Sure.
I mean, I know Llosa does, Llosa is Peruvian.
One is Argentinian.
Yes, Martel is
Argentinian?
Argentinian, and I believe she lives in an area that's kind of remote. So I know in The Headless Woman it kind of appears a little bit like that. You kind of
Yeah.
it's kind of captured,
It
in the
feels
beginning of the film.
Rural at times.
Yeah, because I believe it takes place in her hometown. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but which is really bad. Sorry, but I know it's between Argentina and I believe Bolivia or something. It's like the bordered area, remote area
Sure.
there, and she has a focus not only on where she's from, but she alludes to the dirty war that happened in Argentina, and she feels like a need to kind of
Yeah.
portray these messages of what has happened and the after effect of it as well. But the same goes for Llosa too, who's Peruvian, and she speaks of the dirty war that happened there, which was part of the Shining Path legacy in the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and she feels a need. Llosa lives in Spain. She's lived in Spain for a really long time, but she feels this need to tell about her homeland. So that's what kind of drove her to do it.
Is it easier for her to talk about her homeland not being there?
Yeah, that's what I kind of wonder. I think it must be, because I think a lot of it, I really read into doing some research on her in interviews, and she would love to live there, but I think it's the opportunity.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that comes back to the whole women filmmaker, because I can throw in, for example, in 2010 there was a symposium that was done at the film festival in Peru,
Yeah.
where it was her and Martel and Navarro, who's a Mexican filmmaker, and they were talking about how it's hard. It's really hard for them, and a lot of it is funding. But the reason she lives in Spain is one of the main reasons is that she was able to get funding. Producers found her, and because Peru.
I noticed with Martel that like Pedro Almodovar was one of the producers for many
Yes.
of her films as well.
Yep, at least The Headless Woman.
Yeah,
both
and
of them.
The Holy Girl, I believe.
Yep,
Okay.
they did pick her up and back her as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's, it's part of what comes along with this package. But because of Llosa making these films, I know that 2009, 2010-ish is when she did The Milk of Sorrow, and I think it's been one of the most pivotal films that has ever come out of Peru. And they have a governmental fund. I can't think of an acronym off the top of my head either. It's kind of confusing. But they have a fund, but she says it's not enough.
Yeah.
She was only given something like $10,000
Yeah.
or
Sure.
something ridiculous, and it's just not going to happen. But since she's done that, I heard that that fund has tripled, at least, and
great.
maybe in her favor. But she's been like the biggest thing to come out of Peru since Lombardi. So, and I don't. And the other thing, though, that I have to throw in, you mentioned Almodovar, is that Llosa has a famous uncle, 2 famous uncles. So
Okay.
I wonder about this. I haven't found anything on it, but her uncle Mario Yoga I mean,
Okay.
Mario Vargas Llosa is a literature Nobel Peace Prize recipient.
Oh, okay.
Great.
So, and one of his books was made into a film by Lombardi.
Mm-hmm.
And also, she has an uncle who directed Anaconda, and Luis Llosa is his name, and Hour of the Assassin.
Yeah.
And I haven't found any kind of conclusive evidence, but it just makes me kind of wonder if this helps.
Sure.
Oh, I'm
but when
sure.
desperate
Yeah.
for funding, those things,
Yeah, absolutely.
grease the
Right.
wheels a little bit.
And her uncle is, I think he even ran for president of Peru, I want to say. So, I mean, it just kind of makes me wonder, but at the same time, reading reviews that are not, that come from a lot from the UK, she has been recognized for her talent.
Yeah.
And she's another one that had no intention of being a filmmaker. She entered a non-script at the Havana Film Festival in 2003. It was Mare Nusa, actually,
Okay.
for, script that wasn't shot.
Yeah.
And that's where she kind of picked up producers and that wanted to work with her. They caught wind of this.
So Yosa also writes her scripts. I know Martel
Yes.
does.
Yes.
But
Yes, and actually Yosa, believe it or not, is one of the very few who's now crossing over because she just recently signed a Hollywood deal, I would say about a month ago. It's starting production this year, 2013, and it's going to be called Cry Fly, and it stars Cillian Murphy and Jennifer Connelly.
okay.
okay.
Yeah, so
Irish actress.
yeah. Right. So it's just amazing that, her talent was recognized to be picked up for this Hollywood production. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be curious to see what happens with that.
Yeah.
Like if
Right.
I mean, I feel like I'm being very skeptical right now, but it seems like with a crossover film, everything depends on the success of the film, like regardless sort of what kind of directorial control she will actually have,
exactly, because you're right. I mean, I thought of that too because she's probably not going to have nearly as much as she has. Even though she's writing it, she is. She might be a stronger writer. I don't know, but yeah, that's the thing that I'm worried about for her.
Yeah,
is that
yeah.
like how much control will be stripped from her, and how much will she be able to have over this? Then
Yeah.
it's different. It's Hollywood now,
Right.
so
Is she giving freedom or just a director for hire sort of
Right.
situation? Yeah.
And
Right.
then what happens if the film doesn't do well, and what happens if the film does do well, and
Yeah.
I mean, because we were talking about Catherine Hardwicke, like obviously Twilight did fine.
Right.
Right.
And it still wasn't enough.
Right.
somehow.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of worry for her that I like Yosa very much, so I kind of worry for her in that regard too, because after this, I don't know, if she doesn't do another Hollywood film, it goes back to doing, a Peruvian sort of picture, I mean, what will this do? Will it make or break her? That's because she's done so well, at least on the film
In
festival
the art,
circuit.
yeah,
Right.
art cinema circuit, of course, yeah.
Yep.
Well, this issue of Yosa crossing over brings up just the general, general issue of opportunities, right, for
Right.
women, and sort of change the subject since we have about 10 or 15 minutes left. Susan, you mentioned that for many of the highest grossing films made by women are kids' films, children's films,
Yes.
and is there something about those films that studios, I don't know, seek women directors or just give women more opportunities to make those films, which is why they can succeed in that
I think
sort of
so.
genre?
I mean, I
Like-
think as basic as it sounds, I think that you were saying that there's sort of a potential mistrust, like, oh, can a woman handle this? But when it's a kids film, there's a little bit more trust that I think women know what kids like, or
Yeah.
they're gonna have instincts or something. But it's an interesting trend too, and just because so many women directors go through it, like I think about somebody like Penelope Spheres, who directed the documentaries like The Decline of Western Civilization, 1 and 2, which are about punk music
Yeah.
and metal music,
Right.
and then she goes on to direct Little Rascals, so
Right.
it's like how, like, who tapped her for the Little Rascals, but a lot of directors do that, and you know, Brave was co-directed by a woman. Kung Fu Panda 2, I believe, is the highest grossing film ever directed by a woman.
It's really fascinating.
Yeah.
So
it's actually a lot of, and then obviously Twilight, and you know, if you look at the highest grossing films by women, a lot of them are children's films, and most of the other ones, I believe, are romantic comedies. So
yeah.
Right. Right.
And
yeah.
well, what are some romantic comedies that have been directed by women? Are there?
Oh, like gosh, what's her name? Nancy Summers, I'm thinking. Who did Something's Gotta Give? Am I?
Oh yes,
Oh,
the one
okay.
with
Yeah.
Diane
Yeah.
Lane and Jack Nicholson, right? I
Yeah.
think.
Sure.
Yeah, I believe you're right.
I think it's. I'm. Again, if I can consult my
Sure, go for it.
technology.
Yeah. And what about someone like Julie Taymor? Is a successful. I mean, I haven't really honestly seen. She does, Across the Universe, and what else has Julie Taymor done?
She did Titus, and she
Titus,
did
Titus,
yeah.
that's the one I was trying to remember.
Frida.
Yes, Frida.
Yeah.
But
Frida
she
was a
got-
great film.
So those are kind of like spectacle pictures in a weird sort of way, right?
Right.
Like,
Um,
that's
but yeah, and she obviously, well, I associate her now with Spider-Man, so.
Oh, the Broadway production. Yes.
yeah.
Right,
yeah.
right.
It's hard. I know it is hard for me to separate her from that as well. 'Cause it was a big newsmaker.
It was a hard fall. Yeah.
It was.
Yeah.
Okay, I have my names wrong, but anyway,
Sure.
with the highest grossing films, a lot of times, yeah, the ones that seem to balance out the kids' films are
Mm-hmm.
the romantic comedy, the rom-coms.
Okay.
Yeah, that's true. And another one I know that women do not. It's usually documentary, drama, comedy, but another one that you don't see a lot of women in is horror.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up, actually,
Uh-huh.
because I've really been interested. I hadn't realized until recently that Kimberly Pierce is directing the remake of Carrie, a film which, you know, I don't think needs to be remade, but because of her involvement, it made me more interested. She's perhaps most well known for Boys Don't Cry,
And she did Stop Loss.
and Stop Loss, about returning veterans, or veterans being sent
Yeah.
back to
Right.
to war after returning home. But her career's had some starts and sputters. It seems like she has problems getting projects off the ground, or they've been taken away from her, I think.
Yeah.
She had the rights. I don't know if it was Pierce or not. Who had the rights to The Lovely Bones. There was another. Maybe it was Mary Herron, and then Peter
Yeah.
Jackson like swooped them up out of her hands.
Yeah,
but,
you're right.
But somehow she got this Carrie remake, which I feel like is something that studios would want in a trusted, steady, hand. So I think it's great to see that she has this, and I'm curious what approach she'll bring to this story of teenage female
Hysteria.
hysteria. Yeah. Written by a man, originally directed by a director often accused of heavy misogyny,
Right.
Brian De Palma. And now we get Kimberly Pierce bringing this take to it. And I don't know anything about the production of it. Have either of you heard like what's happening? If there's any sort of sense of the tone of the film?
I'm not sure, but isn't it premiering at a film festival? Like Sundance or somebody is picking it up.
It's
I
coming
think.
out fairly soon,
Yeah.
isn't
Yeah,
it?
I believe
Okay.
so.
But I thought I read it in an article with a film festival. But yeah, it is coming out fairly soon. But
Yeah.
I haven't heard a whole lot about it yet.
Yeah, I watched the trailer, and I'm kind of excited to see it as well, but I also
Yeah.
really like the original
Yeah,
Carrie.
yeah,
Exactly.
And I think Kimberly Pierce is interesting because of that, in part because of that gap between Boys Don't Cry and Stop
Yes,
Loss.
yeah.
Because there were all of these projects, and I actually...
It was a good 7 years or so, I think. at
yeah,
least.
right. And there was sort of a Bigelow effect in there at some
Correct.
point when all these women were,
Mhm.
like making the festival rounds, and they're like, oh, it's a renaissance, and then, it just totally...
Yeah.
Fizzled out.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
who knows who knows what's going to happen after this year?
Yeah.
Right.
And even, Pierce's experience making Boys Don't Cry, I think, speaks to some of the inherent misogyny in the film industry. I don't know if any of you have seen the documentary, This Film Is Not Yet Rated, about the
Oh,
MPA ratings board. And she was talking about bringing Boys Don't Cry to the rating board and, like, getting the feedback. And, like, you have to cut some things. Like, oh, I know there's this violent assault. It's, like, horrific. Like, no, you have to cut like the length of Chloe Savini's like orgasm face or something.
Right,
Like
right.
the pleasure was
Right.
not permitted to get an R rating, but excessive violence, like really extreme violence, was. And there's something that's maybe indicative of a general mindset in the film industry that many of these directors I think brush up against. It's
Right.
it's really problematic.
Yeah, well, and the
Right.
MPAA, I think, is that's a whole different episode.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, Nancy Myers, not Nancy Summers. Nancy Myers.
Nancy Myers,
Right.
yes.
Nancy
okay.
Myers, and I actually don't know Nancy Myers.
She
What-
was
Yes.
the woman who directed Something's Gotta Give.
Ah,
that was
okay.
who I was trying to think
Yeah,
of.
that was her latest, right? Or one of the latest.
I think
don't-
so.
I think it might have been the last one she's done. Okay. Yes.
Anyway.
Okay.
So we have about 5 minutes or so left. We had a sort of loose list of directors we might have gone to. Any that you wanted to reach that we haven't made it? Yeah, Shelley.
I'm sorry. I have. Well, as far as another director goes, is Jane Campion, who's always been near and dear to my heart as well, because that's another woman who has been able to make a crossover. You know, in 1993 with The Piano,
Yeah.
the first woman to, I believe, have an official Academy Award nomination for Best Director, which I think she should have won. Yeah, I know that her film grossed, I think I have some statistics here, but I know it grossed quite a bit. It was the highest, 40 million in the U.S. in 93. It was the 10th highest grossing film. And it was one of very few that was extremely art cinema that was able to cross over. 3 Academy Awards It won 3 Academy Awards. I don't know how many nominations, but it ended up 54 other wins in other film festivals. And I know the original title of the film was supposed to be The Piano Lesson, but I know she changed it. But it's just another director, I think, who hasn't had work in a while, because I know there was a big gap between when she made, for example, In the Cut to Bright Star. There was like
Yeah.
I think there was something like a 6 to 9 year gap. She had a short film in there for the UN on climate change, and speaking of her recently, is that she has a TV miniseries for the BBC called Top of the Lake, and it will be featured in Sundance in a few weeks. And I guess maybe she might count in that women filmmaker list of how many will be entered. But
Yeah.
I know it has a variety of American and British or foreign actors in it, including Elizabeth Moss from Mad Men. And I can't think of a few. Oh, I think Holly Hunter stars in that again. So, because I know that, The Piano, her and Holly Hunter, was pretty successful after The Piano, and Harvey Keitel, another, just
Yeah.
to put someone out there who's always been in most of her films as well. But that's just another filmmaker, I think, that's just brilliant. That's, I don't know as far as like financial and distribution goes with her, but I'm sure has run up against these same
Yeah.
issues of funding, and at least The Piano helped put her, into. It just takes one film sometimes to kind of,
Sure,
get
to
the
get
PR.
notoriety.
Right,
And yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, just because we're on the eve of the Oscar announcements
Right.
tomorrow
Right.
morning, never discount the best foreign language film, because last
Right.
year, I mean, people tend to not talk about this category, but last year Agnieszka Holland was nominated for In Darkness, and that was actually the second time one of her films has been nominated, and she is one of, I believe, two women directors who have had more than one film nominated in that category. And I think Europa was also nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay
Okay.
back in the 90s. But anyway, she's an interesting director to me, but I do think there's also something interesting about sort of privileging the best director category
Right.
when we're
Right.
talking about these international women directors and women who really sort of cross filmmaking systems and are being recognized maybe in other ways or in this other category. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of the foreign language film, in 2010, Yosa was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
that you're right. That is a category I paid attention to. But yeah, In Darkness, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
One
thought
of
In
the-
Darkness was really interesting.
Yeah, I
but-
thought so too.
Yeah, and she.
I didn't see In Darkness. What was the subject matter about?
It was a Holocaust film about this group of Jewish people who are sort of hiding out in the sewers, and this man who's making
Right.
the choice whether or not to help them. But One of the things I found really interesting about it was how unlikable I found most of the characters, and the kind of personal qualms I was having with myself, knowing like this is a Holocaust film and these people are in this terrible situation and I don't like them,
Right.
Yeah.
And there was for me, it was really about the viewer position and sort of, thinking about our engagement with a certain kind of a genre coming out of, World War II films. So I thought it was interesting. But she's incredibly prolific. I mean, she crosses filmmaking systems fairly frequently, and also directs The Wire and directs Treme, and so she's
right.
kind of all over the place. But
I believe she's Polish, right?
yeah, yep.
Okay.
So
So I wonder if she has any upcoming film projects.
Oh, she probably does.
Yeah.
She usually has something. doesn't
she usually has something
Yeah.
brewing. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
One of the very few crossovers.
Well, instead of getting started on another filmmaker or set of films that would get us going too long, maybe we should save them for a follow-up episode at some point. It'd be great to continue this conversation and get more into American independent films. I mean, those were some of the categories that we really didn't explore much, and a few people who skirt the mainstream, like Sofia Coppola. And speaking of nepotism, no, I like her films.
I also received a text while we were doing this that we should discuss Chantal Ackerman.
Oh,
Yes.
Sean Dillman.
Yes. I do love,
I do
Ackerman. Yeah, all these like classic art house directors: Ackerman, Varga,
Oh, yeah.
Varda, not Varga. Yeah, not to mention the great historical pioneers of
Right,
filmmaking,
Lois Weber
Lois Weber,
and
Alice
Alice
Guy.
Guy.
Yeah. So yeah, there really is a whole lot more that cover in this. As I said, this sort of necessarily limited discussion of the category of women filmmakers. But yeah, I'm glad we got to address the figures that we did, particularly Martel, who it was a thrilling experience to really watch some of those films over the last couple days, and hopefully some of you out there will check them out as well. So
Yeah, I think you should.
yeah. Susan, Shelley, thank you once again for coming on, and
Yeah, thanks, Adam.
Thank
yeah,
you.
thanks for listening to us again in 2013. We'll be back next week with, I believe, an episode about road movies.